I know they told you sort of plan for 25 and then we'll have a little bit of flexibility there. At the end of the 30 minutes, we will stay in character with whatever it is you tell us we are. And you'll have 20 minutes of Q&A, after which you can take a deep breath and we'll give you some feedback. Okay? So I've got my timers. I hate this timer, by the way. I'm going to set it for 30 minutes. My name is Barney. I'm the senior judge today, and I've been doing this for 18 years, and I'm really looking forward to your presentation.
My name is Lisa Cavallero. I'm a behavioral consultant, and I've been involved with this program probably almost for as long as Barney has been at various times. Welcome.
Yeah, my name's John Sherman, and I'm a senior program fellow at the CSR initiative at the Harvard Kennedy School, and general counsel of SHIFT, which is an NGO devoted to business and human rights.
Nice to meet all of you. My name is Courtney McCardle. I'm a physics major, but we this is my second IBECC competition. I think it's always very insightful for any major to delve into the world of physics.
I'm Ryan. Nice to meet you. I'm doing a mixture between public policy and psychology right now. So it's a little bit out of my field. Physics, but it's exciting.
And I'm Zoe Gambell. I'm actually a dual degree seeker in strategic communications and public policy and administration.
Terrific. Okay, timer's running.
Thank you all so much for joining us here today. We are your consulting firm for you all, the board of directors for the Perdue company, and we're here to discuss to you some of the allegations of abuses regarding towards the factory workers, the farmers, and as well as the consumers. So our purpose here today is to help you all analyze the legal, ethical, and financial aspects that are coming into play with all of these allegations, and then of course give you recommendations based on the analysis here today. So to just give you a quick framework on how we're going to be attacking all these problems, we're going to give you some background information to help bring you to light as to what these abuses are consistent of, and then work into the legal issues, the financial issues, the ethical issues, and then some recommendations based on this entire analysis. In each of the subsections, we are going to give you some narrowed recommendations based on those specific components, and then at the very end, we're going to span out a little bit, and then give you some more generalized recommendations based on all the information here. Okay. Okay, so some of the background information that we have. Your company did start in 1920 by Arthur Perdue and has expanded into a multi-billion-dollar corporation. Unfortunately, the individuals who are responsible for raising the chickens, the farmers, 80% of these individuals are living at or below the poverty line and struggle very, very hardly to get out of this debt because they only make about $18,000 per year. These farmers, when they first start with the company, they take out a loan to start building some of the materials that they need to start raising these chickens. And as a result, they have an average of about $500,000 in debt to the company. So the company overall has about 19,000 factory workers. Roughly 25% of these individuals are immigrant workers that have been brought over to the United States over circumventing some immigration laws that puts a lot of the farmers' lives at risk. And some of the native factory workers are living in some pretty harsh working conditions and struggle to make complaints to the company due to their lack of response on these issues. And the company overall has about 2,100 farmers in total. So what has Perdue done to help start working on some of these problems? Well, fortunately, now the factory workers are able to be compensated for overtime hours, and we'll discuss more as to what led to that problem in the legal section. And your company has started the No Antibiotics Ever campaign, which as a result yields now about 40% of all your chicken being produced to be organic. And your chicken in the market is noted to be some of the cleanest in the market. And by cleanest, we mean that there is the smallest amount of bacterial infections per 1,000 pounds of chicken. You did increase the minimum wage of the factory workers from minimum wage to now about $10 to $12 per hour, so the factory workers are making an increased living based on working in the factories. And in 2013, your company has gone above and beyond and actually created a corporate responsibility report, unlike your competitors. And as a result, your company also created a code of conduct, which we will discuss some of the aspects of that later in the case. So to now discuss some of the legal aspects of the case and various lawsuits, I'm going to pass it on over to Zoe.
Okay. Thank you. So to begin with the legal section, I'd like to go over a few relevant legislations just so that we can have a general understanding and a general basis when we refer back to these throughout the case. The first one of those is going to be the Fair Labor Standard Act of 1938, also known as the FLSA. This act establishes and regulates minimum wage, overtime pay eligibility, as well as protects against child labor standards. Next one is going to be the Occupational Health and Safety Act of 1970. This is the act that mandates a safe and healthful working condition that employers are required to provide for all employees. Next one is going to be the Employee Retirement Income Security Act of 1974, also known as the IBECC Act. This strictly regulates the minimum pension plans and as well as regulates any income tax security transactions throughout the companies. Next one is going to be contract law. We're going to mention this. It's an oral and written agreement where both parties are required to understand what they are signing, and there should also be a legal aid present when they are discussing whatever's in the contract. Next one is going to be the Whistleblower Protection Act of 1989, which prohibits employers to retaliate using adverse methods when employees speak out against the company, reference things such as safety violations or injuries on the jobs, as well as any other protected activity throughout the company. Next, I'm going to be covering the U.S. Code 1311 dealing in effluent limitations. This basically prohibits the pollution or the discharge of pollution into navigable U.S. waters. Next is finally is going to be the U.S. Code 52 dealing in false advertisements, which basically says it prohibits the false labels and verbiage with the intent to induce customers or entice customers to purchase more based on those labels. Okay, so to move on to some lawsuits where you guys have actually come into contact with these kinds of laws. First one is going to be specifically reference consumers. This is the Humane Society of the United States versus Perdue Farms. The Humane Society actually took up this class action on behalf of Wendy Roy and Nicholas Hemming. The humanely raised that title on your label was actually not in correspondence with the USDA guidelines with the requirements for a chicken being considered humanely raised. This therefore led consumers to believe that the chickens that they were purchasing was humanely raised and ethically raised, and this was in the initial aspect of the No Antibiotics Ever campaign that you launched. So the violations for this specific case were the USDA guidelines, the Perdue Code of Ethics referenced the social contract with consumers, and the US Code 52 referenced false advertisement. Continuing on to another another class action case reference employees. Trotter and other employees were required to be on the line, the assembly line, at a specific time, but they weren't allotted compensation for any time spent before they were on the line. These were like line duties, considered taking off and putting on uniforms, cleaning these uniforms, as well as preparing the chicken and preparing the machines for the assembly process. As a result of this, they were also denied their 2% funds that should be allocated towards their retirement plans. These are direct violations of the IBECC Act of 1974, the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938, and the Perdue Code of Ethics reference employer relationships. Continuing with abuses against employees, Heath versus Perdue Farms. These were actually teams of chicken catchers, and there was teams and there was one supervisor, and Perdue falsely named this one supervisor independent contractors, therefore feeling that they could alleviate themselves of the requirement to give them overtime compensation or make retirement plans for these people, as well as falsely labeling them independent contractors. They also required quotas that were unreasonable So due to these unreasonable quotas, the farmers then turned to alternate motives and were not working in safe or healthful environments, therefore violating the FLSA of 1938, the IBECC Act of 1974, the Perdue Code of Ethics reference employee-employer relationships, and then the OSHA Act of 1970. Now, reference the abuses and allegations against farmers. This is the most recent one and one of the most popularized cases with Perdue Farms. Craig Watts was actually a contract farmer, which means that Perdue gives them baby chickens, and the Craig Watts or the contract farmers will raise those chickens and then give them back to Perdue. So the whole time they're Purdue's, but they're under a contract. Now, Craig Watts spoke out against Perdue by way of video and social media. He spoke out saying that there were it was unsafe and unhealthful work environments for both himself and the chickens. And due to these allegations, Perdue then began sending Watts subpar chickens and chickens that were not adequate. And then he was also docked because the chickens that he was producing, based on the baby chickens that were inadequate, also created inadequate food. He was also subjected to excessive and unreasonable inspections as a result of him speaking out initially. So therefore, this violates the OSHA Act of 1971, which was the original violation, the Whistleblower Protection Act of 1989, as well as the Perdue Code of Ethics reference their contracts and farmers. And finally, this is going to be lawsuits against Perdue Farms, reference their consumers. The Askew Coastkeeper Trust versus Allen and Kristen Hudson Farm. Allen and Kristen Hudson Farm is actually as well a contract farm, and the initial class action lawsuit was against both Kristen Hudson Farm and Perdue, because while Purdue's chickens were on their farm, they created a waste, and this waste was considered a pollutant, and this pollutant was then dumped into the Ponoke River, which leads into the Chesapeake Bay, therefore violating the U.S. Code 1311, which deals in affluent limitations, saying that you cannot dump into navigable U.S. waters, as well as the Perdue Code of Ethics, specifically the section that says they are going to do things to the best of their possibility to minimize environmental damage. Now, after looking at these lawsuits, we're able to see that there's potential for loss, obviously, if more of these come out, but there's also potential for much improvement. And we can see that through Tyson Foods, which is our leading competitor, your leading competitor, and they're the largest poultry market in the United States. In the past 2 years alone, they have actually faced over 18 class action laws, and some of these have resulted into $6 million each for each settlement. Now, this can be a means of improvement, a potential for improvement, if we take heed and follow the recommendations that we're going to give you throughout this presentation. We will not have to go through everything that Tyson has had to go through. We'll not have to face their potential loss, and we could easily become the leading poultry company in the United States. So to take you into that financially, so you can see just how much you can gain or lose, I'm going to hand it off to my colleague Courtney.
Thank you very much. So I'm just going to go over some of the major financial aspects of the Perdue company. I did state earlier that this is a multi-billion-dollar company, specifically $6.2 billion, an increasing amount of revenue every single year that estimates to be of about $2 billion total in just revenue sales. Of those sales, 90% of those is chicken sales, and about 10% of those is turkey sales, presumably to be around Thanksgiving time. Of those chickens, your company produces about 640 million chickens every single year, averaging at about $1 per pound. In your company, you do spend about $15 million every single year on advertisements, which does have a substantial impact on accruing that $2 billion a year revenue. And your company sells to over 30 countries around the world, including China, Russia, and Japan. Your company also processes its own soybean feed and its own grain feed for other agricultural markets, such as cattle, sheep, and pig, and the other smaller agricultural markets in the United States. Luckily for your company, the consumption of overall chicken has doubled in the past 5 years, from about 80 million chickens per week to now about 160 million chickens per week. So I did state that your company does have a substantial financial market share. This is a chart showing all of the significant to somewhat significant chicken markets here in the country. This is Perdue right here. This is your company, this little sliver here that's only about 8%. And you can clearly see here your competitors, Pilgrim's Pride and Tyson Foods, do hold probably the largest market share in the entire world with respect to how much a single company holds control over the market share here. This section here is companies that are about less than 2 to 1%, so they're kind of excluded from that factor here. But you can clearly see here that the company, even though it is 8%, $6.2 billion is a massive control of the overall poultry market. And as I'm going to say in just a few moments here, your company has a lot of chance to improve with the financial aspects. So here are some of the current positions with your company with regard to some of the financial aspects that we've stated with regards to legal components here. Even though we didn't state too much about the Korean immigrants that are coming over here specifically, this is where the financial parts would only come into play here because your company was not held criminally liable, so no laws came into effect. Your company originally invested about $30,000 for each of these individual employees to be sent over to the United States to work in your factories. But unfortunately, because your company was curtailing some of these strict immigration laws, your company then stopped the program in 2000, but are still under allegations of bringing over these immigrant workers by still the same method as what you were previously by curtailing some of these immigration laws here. Some of your workers, just some of the native workers in your factories are still facing a lot of health conditions with regards to some of the antibiotics and other horrible living conditions that the chickens are living in do bring over diseases in the factories, and because there aren't a lot of safety protocols in the factories, they are living under some pretty intense health risks on a daily basis, such as UTIs and other staph infections, as well as possibly getting amputated from some of the machines that don't have a lot of safety features on them. So that also has a lot of financial possibility for loss here in that aspect. The farmers, well, with regard to the farmers are not allowed to allocate funds towards the loan that they originally took out when they first started producing chickens for the company, and as a result, the farmers stay in this perpetual state of indebtedness towards the company, which actually is a financial liability on the company if you have people that cannot consistently pay their loan back off to them. And also, these farmers are still facing retaliation from Perdue. Even though that lawsuit that we had stated earlier, with regards to Greg Watts was settled, there are still thousands of other farmers that still get retaliated against in the exact same way that Craig Watts was, and in various other unique and interesting forms, like having the farmers make unnecessary upgrades to their farms, which actually ends up costing the company billions of dollars every year just for unnecessary products that aren't really relevant to the overall humane raising of the chickens here. So there is a potential for future financial loss. This is with respect to the potential criminal liability. Now here are the financial aspects of them. We stated that Tyson Foods has dealt with some criminal litigation in the past that cost them about $21 million. One of those individual lawsuits was a breaching of the farmer's contract, which would have to deal with how your company has been breaching the contracts due to retaliation against the company. That individual lawsuit cost Tyson about $750,000. Now, new federal laws can also be put into play here due to the consumers becoming more aware of the way that the farmers are being treated, in addition to state laws that are trying to pass their own additional laws with respect to how the farmers are being treated. With regards to the safety and health violations here, the average fine per individual whose health and safety violations were violated averages to be about $1.5 million. And that's normally a collection of all the individual violations that were with respect to that. Each individual willful violation comes to be at least $5,000. That can come to at most $75,000. And the Whistleblower Protection Act violations averages to be about $10,000 per person. Fortunately, there is a possibility to gain through all of this. Of course, by listening to what the farmers have been recommending to your company in the first place. Instead of retaliating against the company, if we listen to these farmers and follow through with the recommendations that they've been trying to make for the company, it can actually increase more revenue for the company, because not only are the farmers no longer having to stay in a perpetual state of indebtedness, but they can actually produce a product that's healthier for the consumers and doesn't allow as much financial burden on the company overall. Most of the farmers have been complaining to the company about producing chickens that are more than just free range, is what some people are, but actually roaming free with some sunshine out on an open farm. That decreases the amount of overall cost and factory products that they have to produce for the farmers, and it helps create a healthier chicken that actually produces more revenue in the end, and I'll bring the numbers right here. Organic chicken produces about $3 per pound, and even though it costs about 20% more to produce an organic chicken, that still almost doubles your company's worth from $6.2 million to about $11.8 billion in your company's worth. If your company should also develop cooperation with your company, between the farmers and the workers themselves. Listening to the farmers and listening to the factory workers prevents your company from any criminal litigation as well as financial loss. If your company goes above and beyond to actually listen to the workers and hear out the recommendations, you can avoid substantial financial loss in the future as a result of a potential lawsuit or even a criminal violation. And of course, by listening to these individuals, there's always the opportunity to improve profits. And that'll actually go through when we talk about transparency here in just a moment. And of course, following through with the Code of Ethics. The Code of Ethics for any company involves obeying the law, respecting the workers, respecting the consumers, and of course, by just adhering and implementing to these basic rules and concepts, your company can avoid a lot of potential financial loss, like criminal litigation, potential loss because of lawsuits. But actually, if your consumers are aware that you're following through with the Code of Ethics, the consumers respond very highly to that, and I'll mention that in just a moment here. So something that is also working in highly benefit of your company is that, as we had stated earlier with regards to the cleanest chicken, this is the numbers here on how clean your chicken is specifically. This is compiled of data that has been taken over the past 25 years with respect to thousands of pounds of chicken and their contamination levels from Staphylococcus, Campylobacter, E. coli, and this is where they come into play here. Your company has a substantial possibility to capitalize on the idea of promoting in commercials with that $15 million advertisement income that that your company has, and capitalizing on letting customers know that you have the cleanest chicken in the market. A consumer does not want to buy a piece of chicken or any piece of poultry meat that they have questions that whether or not it has been contaminated or whether or not it has any bacteria that's going to make them sick. And then of course here, this is where all this comes into play here. Ethical companies are more profitable. Employees are much more productive when they know that there is a positive financial incentive at the end of the day. Employees are less likely to leave the company, which excludes the company's responsibility of having to pay to train somebody new, so it's more cost effective if the employees stay with the company. Consumers are more highly to respond to companies that are more ethical. Vendors and suppliers prefer to deal with a company that's more ethical because it prevents them from being in any criminal litigation or financial liability as well. And ethical companies attract more talented executives and employees, and that's really easily understandable just from an ethics standpoint. If a talented worker wants to go work for a company, they're not going to go to the company where they're in fear that their health and safety rights are going to be violated. If they're going to be in fear that they're not going to get overtime compensation, those workers are going to go towards a different company. And we want them for your company because your company has already implemented a lot of these actions into play, and we can help expand that by attracting the most talented executives and employees and generate more profit for the company. And here's the big kicker here. Ethical companies make an average of 500% more revenue than the other unethical companies here. So now why do I keep doing that? Now to start expanding on the ethical aspects of this case here and how they come into play, I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Brian.
Thank you, Mr. Turtle. So I'm going to be discussing several ethical concepts and theories that you can use to analyze Perdue's behavior and make sure that it's both ethical and economically sound and conducive to business longevity. First, I will be going over rule utilitarianism to create some of the moral imperatives that we believe can enforce ethical behavior within the Perdue company. And to explain rule utilitarianism, we must go back to its roots. Rule utilitarianism was started by John Stuart Mills as an alternative to Jeremy Bentham's more morally relativistic act utilitarianism. John Stuart Mills was fed up with, was not satisfied with how act utilitarianism focused on the ethical nature of the outcome of an action instead of the ethical nature of the action itself. what John Stuart Mill provides is an avenue to create moral imperatives that reflect commonly held ethical standards. To determine how universal these standards can be applied, we look at the rule that can create the greatest aggregate good and the least aggregate harm for the highest number if everyone were to follow that law. These come together as net utility. And we put together some rules that we believe are conducive to ethical behavior in the business environment. For rules that Perdue should produce, it must be assured that employees are treated with equality and respect, with access to fair conflict resolution. A healthy environment must be assured through actions on the employee side and the employer's side. Employee dignity and integrity must be respected, and avenues to express concerns must be provided, and information should always be held confidential and respected. These moral imperatives are applicable to on the employee side as well. We've determined through a multitude of studies, most notably a 2007 Goldman Sachs study, that employees, when businesses align with their personal values, produce greater quantities and are 35% more likely to remain with the company. Next, we'll be looking at some of the implicit social agreements and obligations through the lens of public perception. As it stands, Perdue is alleged of being complicit with very unethical and almost unlawful behavior in many cases. They've been able to lean on their previously held public perception as a positive and ethical company in order to avoid the economic repercussions of long-standing changes. Unfortunately, this is a huge violation of trust on part of the Perdue Farm Incorporation to its consumers, its factory workers, and its farmers. Looking at the relationship between business and consumer, we have, like we've said, lawsuits pertaining to the humanely raised label, as well as potential for lawsuit with the precedence of the humanely raised lawsuit, because it was determined that they needed to remove that label. The No Antibiotics Ever campaign reports that there is no antibiotics ever, as the name would suggest. But as it stands, there are only 40% of chickens produced organically, while the other 60% remain chicken with antibiotics, or actually vice versa. But for the clean chicken, they are still feeding off of the same feed that the antibiotic chicken feed off of, and therefore are oftentimes exposed to the antibiotics that the other chicken are treated with. So this is an example of gross false advertisements, and opens up the potential for criminal litigation in the future when we look at the precedents of the hormone lawsuits. Next, looking at the relationship between the business and the factory worker, we have gross health violations as well as dignity violations. The Oxfam America expose reports that some factory workers are forced to wear diapers on the job because of lack of ability to get proper breaks. These are what lead to urinary tract infections and oftentimes prostate cancer in men. The high volume of chicken that they deal with per minute oftentimes leads to osteoporosis and other bone amalgamations because of the repetitive nature of their movements. So with a relationship between the business and the farmer, we have gross economic misconduct because of the way that number one, contracts are doled out, and number two, the way payment is doled out. As we saw with Craig Watts, it's oftentimes cyclical. In the lower wages guaranteed by the lottery system of Perdue, which says that if you meet a certain threshold for chicken, you will get paid the highest amount, and if you meet under that threshold or under the amount of chicken that your competitors are producing, you will only be left with the least amount of money. And this is oftentimes partnered with the quality of chicken that these people receive. In terms, when we look at Craig Watts, he was stuck with the lowest amount of, or the lowest quality broiler chickens, and therefore would only be guaranteed a sub-living wage if these cyclical conditions were to continue. In terms of the debt that the farmers face, we know that they oftentimes have around $500,000 in debt towards the company and are not able to pay for it because they make an average of $18,000 a year, and in many states are below poverty line, as we discussed in the introduction. And when people do not have access to a living wage, they cannot be guaranteed proper health care. And so this is not only an economic violation, but an issue of the health of the farmers themselves. Moving on, we believe that the issue could be resolved here simply. If Perdue were simply to follow their own rules and regulations enumerated in their Code of Ethics and Corporate Responsibility reports, they would be able to improve their relationship with the public, therefore increasing the amount of trust the consumers have with them, and as we have seen before, increase the profits of the company by as much as 500% because of the predisposition of a consumer towards an ethical company. We know that consumers seek out ethical companies because they're often looking for labels like humanely raised. They're often looking for labels like no antibiotics ever. But because of the nature of the FDA standards associated with these labels and the amount of time consumers have to research this, they are not able to ensure that these labels are actually correct. So, to look at what Perdue would need to do in order to make sure that their actions are aligned with their Code of Ethics and Corporate Responsibility reports are to fulfill their promise to provide associate safety and health and offer wellness programs, to improve food safety measures and the health and nutrition aspects of their products, and to exceed industry standards for poultry welfare programs. As the founder, Arthur Perdue, once said, quality is no accident. We understand that Perdue will never be content with just meeting the threshold of their competitors, and if they were to really commit to an ethical path forward, in summation, we believe that. All right. Okay, in summation, we believe that they would only need to follow their own rules, which can be perfectly summarized within the golden and the silver rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you, and Confucius's do not do unto others as you would not have them do unto you. We're going to finish off with some quick general recommendations for court. Thank you.
Thank you very much. After everything that we've discussed here today, these are the more generalized recommendations that we feel that your company would benefit not only ethically, legally, but also financially with all these aspects. The most important one that we feel here, and that's how we placed it first, is that your company should definitely publicly affirm your ethical position. As we did state earlier, the 500% increase in revenue is a very substantial increase, especially when your company is worth about $6.2 billion. And as we saw earlier, consumers are highly responding to companies that are ethical. So if you publicly affirm that you are going to be working more ethical and producing not only an ethical chicken, but treating your farmers and your workers more ethically, consumers are going to be more respondent to that. Your company should also plan to produce all of your chickens organically by 2026. You've already started this with the No Antibiotics Ever campaign, but if we implement a 10-year plan to produce organic chickens, not only will that increase the profits of your company, but the consumers will trust your company more as well, because it shows the dedication that you're trying to end all the hostilities that consumers are so widely aware of on how the chickens are living their lives. And of course, report this process on a yearly basis. Consumers like to be held aware of what type of progress that companies are making and how fast they're working to become a more ethical company. And of course, your company should work up to live to its corporate responsibility report and ensure that the regulations that you're enforcing are benefiting both the farmers and the workers. One of the more important ones here, and I think I'm on the wrong slide. There we go. is that your company should work with independent animal wellness programs, because this will expound the consumer's knowledge that you're trying to work not only with the realm of just your company, but with the realm of other companies as well, to actually show and reflect on the consumers how dedicated you are to giving the consumer a product that lived a happy life, that was killed in a humane way, and happily ended up on their dinner plate. I use that term loosely. Of course, your company, one of the most important ones here, should create a committee to actually oversee implementation of the Code of Ethics and the Corporate Responsibility Report. Your company has spent hundreds of thousands of dollars just to make the Corporate Responsibility Report due to how many contractors and subcontractors they had to come in for this writing process. And there's no point in wasting that kind of money if it's only to look up there just for a label on your website. We have to make sure that somebody is actually implementing these type of rules and implementing these types of standards, because as we've stated earlier, your Code of Ethics helps you avoid criminal litigation and financial liabilities here. And of course, ensure the factories and the farms protect the environment. It'll help you curtail some of the violations with regard to how the environments were treated. And again, consumers are very respondent on companies that want to protect the environment. One of the other ones
Courtney,
here,
I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up.
now we asking to allow the farmers to actually allocate some money towards the loans, because again, it will help get rid of the type of stresses that they're living with that type of debt that has accrued. And then of course, ensure business transparency, because it makes your company more trustful in the eyes of the consumer. Thank you.
Thank you. Now comes the hard part. So, Zoe, you talked a lot about the legal issues that you face. It seems to me that what you're saying is that we are in violation of a lot of laws. How does that translate into an ethical problem?
Because it's not, your company has a ethical code. Yes, you have a code of ethics, and the way you act also reflects on the way your company presents itself. You have stuff enforced in your code of ethics that, in layman's terms, translates the FLSA law, the ERISA laws, and the nature of those things. So really, your code of ethics is strongly in compliance with these laws that I brought up, which is why I brought them into this presentation, because if you're violating these laws, you're also violating your code of ethics.
Just to expound on that, laws are originally created to help ensure ethical responsibility and make sure that people are acting ethically, because it's easy to see that some of the laws that we have here just in town, or even federal laws, may seem a little bit silly, but they have an ethical purpose. It's unethical to go speeding at 90 miles down the road because it puts a lot of other lives in danger. At the same time, it's against the law to breach the contracts with these farmers, because it puts so much power in the company and not enough power with the farmer, and it has them living in a state to where nobody would want to be living in that type of state. So a lot of laws are reflected upon what we feel, or what everybody feels to be ethical limitations for everybody.
I think it could be best summed up by saying that unlawful behavior is not conducive to what we describe as net utility, greatest aggregate good and least aggregate harm, and it's definitely not conducive to consumer health, to worker health, and to farmer health. This is the core ethical issue of this presentation.
Courtney, you said that the company could increase its profitability by a factor of 500%, if it's ethical. Isn't that overwriting the matter a little bit? That sounds a little exaggerated.
We had actually examined that issue first, and we thought that it might have been a typo, but that study was actually produced by the University of Harvard and compared the net sales of ethical companies as opposed to unethical companies, and the relationship between when consumers found out that a company was acting unethically in relation to how the company's finances reflected after they had made amends for issues like that. We can take, for example, here Nike was found to have using child slaves in the production of some of their shoes, and as a result, their company profits dropped by over 180%. And once they publicly affirmed that they were no longer going to be using these enslaved children, as well as impoverished individuals from overseas, improving how the quality of their shoe was going to be made, their company profits then increased by about 350%. So that's about an estimate of how much a company can make but it is an average increase to be up to be 300 to 500% in financial.
And to relate it to the industry, we have the Consumer Reports organization saying that people would be willing to pay up to $4, sometimes even $6 per pound for organic and humanely treated chicken. So we see definite potential for growth.
You're assuming that the market for virtue is elastic. We can talk about that. The other question that I have relates to supply chain, because you just mentioned that, Courtney, in the Nike context. You've talked about Nike's workers, you've talked about their farmers, but you haven't, I'm sorry, Perdue's workers, farmers, no mention of what's going on in their supply chain, those who make the grain and all of the transportation and everything else. Any attention paid by Perdue to that?
Yes, and that's because Perdue is a private company, and about 90% of that stuff they make themselves. They buy their own trucks, they have their own company. They spend about $600 million every single year on these types of supplies. That's why these contractors or these farmers are under a contract for the company. These aren't individuals that can buy chicken from any company. They have a contract specifically with Perdue, and same with the factory workers. And since this is a private corporation, they keep all those expenditures to the company themselves. So they don't typically or commonly go out to external suppliers to give them those types of resources.
And if you would, sorry. If you would like to look at the health aspect of the transportation part of the industry, there was definite potential for diseases to grow and fester in the conditions that they are transported in. We saw this with the case study of Sanderson's Farms, who had, through another source, a reported amount of 6% salmonella infection in their chicken, which isn't that much compared to the rest of the industry. But because of the way these chickens were transported, there was a huge salmonella outbreak. And Perdue only has around, Sanderson has 12, Perdue only has 6% salmonella infections. So, actually the other way around, I'm sorry. So it's even more likely that Perdue might be held liable and need to take economic recall of chickens.
Wouldn't you expect that in your recommendations you would have recommendations relating to the contracts that Perdue enters into transportation companies to ensure that they transport the chickens in a safe way?
Perdue actually doesn't technically have contracts with transportation companies due to the fact that those that are transporting are also the chicken catchers. So the chicken catchers bring to the farms that they go to, they bring the cages in the back of the truck, and those teams, those supervisory teams that were labeled as independent contractors, those are actually the ones doing all of the manpower when it comes to those chickens. So they don't have contracts with transportation companies.
So staying in role, so you're advising us
Yes,
as
ma'am.
the board of directors. I heard you say a couple things about the ethical dilemmas here. So my question is, are you saying that we have to behave ethically just to avoid A, lawsuits, and B, to increase profitability? I think that I would like to know, as a board of director, if we have a code of ethics, and I think one of you said, if we would only adhere to our own code of ethics.
Mm-hmm.
So that leads me to believe that we're not. But it sounds like your recommendation to us is that it behooves us to adhere to our code of ethics in order to simply either avoid lawsuits or increase profitability.
Actually, it doesn't. We would like for you guys to adhere to your code of ethics because you guys have an amazing PR front. Your website is flawless and it has all of your quotes and all of the history of your company. And it also very clearly explains the history of your company and the when your company was originated, they were originated to help other people. They were originated to get food out on other people's plates and food that people were conscious that it was ethically raised, that the farmers that helped create that were treated ethically as well. So we don't want you to only adhere to ethics or adhere to your ethical code due to the fact that it'll bring revenue, but due to the fact that this is what you guys present. This is what you guys were founded upon. Your father, I don't know if you're really the guy, it's your father and grandfathers, that created this company, and he created it with the intent for it to be an ethical company. He wanted it to be an ethical, sound American company that originally created in Indiana, so that's why.
There's that quote from Arthur Perdue that says, "Quality is no accident." I brought it up in the ethical section. I think it's definitely pertinent here.
Since you've identified, to my mind, at least half a dozen potential human rights violations running from running from modern slavery to safety violations, human trafficking, potential denial of a living wage, and also abridgment of the right to join a union. I wonder why you wouldn't have made a recommendation for the company to adopt the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, which is the authoritative global standard on the subject, and conduct human rights risk impact assessment to identify all the human rights and which are the most severe and how they're managed.
The reason why we didn't implement something like noting those specific type of laws is that it's actually stated in your code of conduct how strictly you should be respecting the welfare and safety of the workers as well as the farmers. We just didn't want to be redundant in naming something else that also explained our point. So that's why we just stuck to the code of ethics as well as the corporate responsibility report, because those importances are stated.
Those are moral imperatives, just like the ones we'd outlined as a result of rural utilitarianism. And those weren't even solid moral imperatives. Those were more guidelines for the facilitation of rules made by Perdue to ensure that they could self-regulate and be an ethical company on their own accord. We didn't want to come in and say and give absolutist definitions of what.
It was really focusing on the recommendation for a management system for addressing all of these violations, ethical and legal, which would include a risk assessment, and then a due diligence program so that you can know and show that you are respecting human rights. That's kind of where my question is.
Okay.
Lisa?
I think I'm fine in terms of questions.
Yeah. One of the points you made was that it seems to me you were giving us permission to wait until 2026 to eliminate antibiotics from the chickens. Why do we have to wait that long?
The 2026 deadline wasn't specifically for just getting rid of antibiotics. That was to make chickens organic entirely. This includes antibiotics, antimicrobials, any feed that does contain other non-organic ingredients. The deadline with result to, or the recommendation with result to the antibiotics program was to implement a program that then expanded into an entire organic program. And it does take a lot of resources and time to clean up farms, to get new supplies that don't contain the previous feed that did contain antibiotics and other inorganic materials. And it wouldn't be cost effective for your company to immediately stop everything and buy new products, get new chickens, which you would then have to start purchasing other chickens that were organic and then start breeding those chickens. It's a very, very long and expensive process. So if it's gradual over a 10-year program, you can start that off by pleasing the customers and actually showing them that you do care about their wellness and how antibiotics do come to play in human health by just starting with getting rid of antibiotics and then working that into a 10-year organic plan.
But why do we have to take off the no antibiotics ever label
The reason why we
while
want to
the
take
rest
that
of the
label
program is
off,
being implemented?
that was one of the more important issues with regards to the antibiotics.
It was not the no antibiotics ever. The no antibiotics ever is the campaign, and the humanely raised was the label that had to be taken off of the packaging.
With regards to the taking off the no antibiotics label for the chickens that do have the antibiotics label, the chickens in the silos on the farms are commonly switched around from farm to farm, especially when they go from the farm to the processing plant, commonly go through the same belts and same machines of the other chickens that were treated with those antibiotics, and a lot of times, as he stated, end up consuming the feed of the other inorganic chickens. And actually, there has been about 80% of the 40% of no antibiotics ever chicken that actually did still have antibiotics in them as a result of that. So we were just taking that recommendation purely to help avoid criminal liability for that false label.
Yes, in the short term, there's definitely legal precedent, as we've seen with the humanely raised case, that Perdue is open to a lawsuit of, pertaining to false advertising when we look at the no antibiotics ever label. So.
Right, so there is a no antibiotics label, or there's not?
Yeah, well, there's a campaign and a label. So their campaign involves taking steps to make sure that they will eventually reach that no antibiotic standard, but at the present moment they have not met it. So it can definitely be argued that it is false advertising in the meantime. So.
I wasn't clear on something one of your charts showed, which was a wedge, 23% market share. Was that an aggregate of small suppliers?
Yeah.
Yes, those were all companies that have like 2 to less than 1% of the overall market.
I didn't see any discussion about, although it was implied, about Purdue's attitude towards unionization. And is that relevant to any ethical issues regarding its treatment of its employees?
We did originally have some information with regards to unionization. The problem is that there wasn't enough to actually to make a substantial ethical argument with it. Perdue does really care about all the different types of workers that they bring into their program. They have people as young as 16 that are doing some basic work that is within the laws of 16-year-old work, to individuals that are 66 years old that are also female. They bring in a lot of minorities to the workforce, so they're very open with the type of people that they bring into their factories as well as on their farms.
Are there other resources besides those 11?
Yes.
Oh, there's like
Yeah.
31 of them.
I thought there was a slide that said 32.
There's a whole bunch.
You talked about the men wearing diapers because they couldn't get to restrooms, and that was a cause of prostate cancer. Where's the evidence for that?
According to the Oxfam America expose, who ran a longitudinal study to determine the long-standing effects of, what wearing that kind of equipment in the workplace would have.
Is this the Marco Rubio thing?
Yeah, exactly. It's just the Oxfam America expose followed up with that longitudinal study because they were seeing prevalence of UTIs and prostate cancer in these men who were subjected to wearing diapers, but they wanted to make sure with hard scientific evidence that they would have something to back it up in the case that they would be asked that very question. So.
They're wearing diapers because they weren't allowed bathroom breaks?
Yes, that's
Mhm.
correct.
That and a lot of the farmers, factory workers would try and hold it in as long as they could, and that does cause a considerable amount of damage, not
Which
just
is,
to the
yeah.
bladder, but to the prostate and everywhere in between.
That's where it comes from.
That's outrageous.
Any other questions from the judges? Okay, take a deep breath, guys. Good job. Just feedback time, so a couple of observations. Zoe, you are such a persuasive speaker that when you're standing over there that far from the screen, I don't know whether to look at you. I keep getting drawn to you, but it looks like there's important stuff on the screen. So sometimes just from a presentation point of view, it might be helpful if you're where Courtney was, sort of over here, and then we can look at you and the screen.
Okay. I had just a couple of things, so I'll kind of put them all at once. I have to commend you. I mean, you really, it was very evident that you took a lot of time to do your research and put together the presentation. There was almost too many things that you were trying to encompass, and a little almost too ambitious in terms of looking at everything. At one point, I thought this easily could have been all the topics that you had in terms of all the points that you were making, from the legal violations to the ethical violations to the financial violation, all of that. Each one of those could have been its own presentation on its own. So I would just, so I want to commend you for being so ambitious. But for me, I really wanted to get into the nitty-gritty of some of your recommendations, and I felt like there was just too much information that you threw at us to begin with. Your specific ethical recommendations, I would have loved to have seen at the beginning of your presentation, and then use all of the financial and legal stuff to back up what you were recommending, because the legal and financial stuff just got too bogged down in the beginning, and just didn't have enough time to cover all the ethical stuff in there. So you did a great job, and you were very ambitious ambitious in doing it, and obviously very well prepared in your research. But maybe just in the future, just really just zeroing in on something to really give just a good overview, because you had so much good information.
Well, I thought you guys did an excellent job, and I learned a lot about this, which is one of the reasons that I chose this, which will disappoint me. I think having made dozens of these presentations to board and all boards, and having been on the receiving end, a couple of observations. I might have started with the really awful stuff in graphic detail, like the farmers wearing diapers. That's awful, horrible stuff. And some of the facts that whether you call them ethical, legal, financial, or otherwise, get the facts out first, and really grab the audience by that. So I might have started with that. I might have started with the ethical issues first. On the financial side of things, the thing that really gets me is the criminal. I mean, here I'm a board member, and if there's criminal misconduct going on, that means that I, as a board member, can get potentially in trouble. So I would have hammered the criminal. It's sad to say, but $6 million in a multi-billion-dollar company for damage suits isn't. It's kind of bugged us. I don't want to say that, but that's really the way people tend to think. I would have, on the legal side, I might have also talked about, there's a lot of new legislation, the California Transparency and Supply Chain Act, the federal procurement regulations, the UK Modern Slavery Act, since you do business abroad, that deals specifically with your need to be transparent on whenever there's allegations of human trafficking in your business. And I think there's some clear potential issues here. If you're talking to a board and you mention the word complicit, that will just send off skyrockets in the board member's mind, saying, oh my God, I'm going to jail. So if I were a board member, I'd be down your throat on that, and you'd have to come up with evidence. Because complicity is a legal term. It means it means you've actively aided and abetted a crime. Whoa. On the issue of the market, I'm very sympathetic to your position, and I agree with your recommendations completely. But if I were a board member and I heard 500% increase, I would have been all over you. And I think when you make a claim like that, you better be able to show that it would apply to this particular business and this particular sector, because there's other studies that show that the market for virtue is indeed not elastic. That it applies to certain consumers for certain kind of products. But not always. So I think you guys did a great job. I probably also wouldn't have cited, just from a board member, the hearing John Stuart Mill and Jeremy Bentham.
Right alongside Goldman Sachs.
Yeah.
Greatest philosophers of our time.
I would have tried to find a way to try to say that without making academic references, because board members don't respond over that.
Can I pick a few nits? Because I'm a lawyer and that's what I do.
Oh, okay.
Some of the early slides need proofreading.
Okay.
Take a look at the spelling of effluent versus affluent. Different words.
We actually fixed that, but we opened up the wrong slide here. We opened up the wrong presentation. In our final one, we did, and this was number 4, not number 5. That's why. So I did catch that in the room.
And the PowerPoint that I have on my laptop where we did do this was very outdated, and we're having a very difficult time from fixing words and then having them being super scripted and then trying to fix it, and then it gets indented, and then we try and fix it
looks
back.
like you cut and pasted.
So it got very, very frustrating to have to keep going over and doing the same thing. So eventually it was like, if it's on there, we just if we fix it, it's going to be a 2-hour fix.
And I haven't looked at the Fair Labor Standards Act in a while, but I'm pretty sure it's not spelled with a U, the British spelling. L-A-B-O-R versus L-A-B-O-U-R. So, and you're not consistent in that. And people notice that, and it detracts from your substance when you do that. And there's also just some cleanup stuff, spacing, and you have a couple of words run together. So just pay attention to that, only because it really does detract from the substance of your message. Question for the three of you, do you still eat chicken?
Our professor doesn't anymore.
I always buy from local farms. It's the local.
Good job, thank you very
Yeah,
much.
thank
Well
you.
done.
Thank you.